Hey gang, Blake's and Bounds back from Studio G or Studio Garage, whichever you want to call it.
Right.
There's a theme to this little episode, and the theme is home.
Right. And this is, I guess I came up with this idea. I read this article by Margaret Larson, and you can explain a little bit more about your association with Margaret, and I'll mention mine too. But yeah, it was just a piece she wrote because she recently moved back to the Northwest.
Margaret worked in Seattle for a number of years. When I first got here, I did the morning news, and I'd get into King early in the morning, 4 a.m., and at 4:30 the pre-Today Show would air.
Right.
And she was anchoring that at the time and had done some of the Today Show and eventually ended up at Cairo and then left Cairo and came to King
Right.
to work the 11 o'clock news with me for about 3 years.
Yeah. I knew her a little bit while she was doing newscasts at King 5, and then she switched over to New Day Northwest
Yes.
and hosted that show for like 10 years. And along the way, a series of videos that I produced and edited for King 5 were on the Apollo lunar landing, the Apollo 11 landing in 1969. And so to celebrate the 50th anniversary, I profiled some people and what they remembered about the event. And yes, I talked to you at the time. And we also talked to Margaret Larson.
I was about 10 years old, and we were at home in Lubbock, Texas, and I was watching TV with my dad, who was so into this. It was black and white TV. He was a career Air Force pilot, so he was super into the whole idea of the technology, the courage of these pilots who became astronauts, you know. He felt very patriotic and competitive about it. And I remember him recording it on a cassette recorder. He wanted the audio, the sound of it, so he could relive it over and over again. Of course, you know, today we'd have it taped or we'd put it on, you know, whatever it is on demand, but that's how into it he was.
Margaret retired then from television and eventually moved out to the East Coast,
Right.
somewhere in North Carolina, and now is back here where she belongs.
Right. We, as friends of Margaret's, all feel that way, but also her story about her coming back, well, I just found it very interesting. So you're going to take a look at it, and we're actually going to have Dennis read it out loud.
Growing up as a military kid, my concept of home was flexible, maybe even a little fuzzy. I was born on an air base in Ohio, but we moved 2 months later, so that wasn't home or even a hometown. A series of other moves followed back and forth across the country. The bases all operated the same way, and the pilots were moved in squadrons, so even though I was repeatedly the new kid in school, there were other new kids I already knew. It was easy. Eventually, the relocations blurred together a bit. Life unfolded in a familiar way, but none of those places felt like home, even if military base life did. My dad flew the KC-135 refueling mission and was gone a lot during the Vietnam War, and to survival school, R&R, and on alert. My mom and I did most things on base, grocery shopping, church, school, doctor's visits. The only place we lived where we explored a lot outside of base was in New England. You guessed it, also not home. My husband's father worked as an agricultural advisor in the U.S. Agency for International Development, so his childhood was on the move from Central America to West Africa to Europe. He spoke Spanish before English. When we got married, we were both in the television business, which also involved frequent moves, and we were both entirely comfortable with that way of life. But when I left my first of 2 stints with NBC, we finally had the opportunity to choose a city because we wanted to, not because of an assignment or a job. We had friends from Seattle who always raved about it, and we knew the area was beautiful. Then it turned out that my husband's first job offer after I left NBC was in Seattle. Like magic. By then we had a 1-year-old son and wanted him to grow the kind of roots and sense of place that we had lacked growing up. We hoped we would like the Pacific Northwest and would be able to stay. Little did we know that we would come to absolutely love it and end up living here longer than either of us had ever lived anywhere. I worked at Cairo TV first, then back at NBC Dateline, and later at King TV. After 10 years of hosting New Day Northwest on King TV, I retired shortly after COVID hit. We had a family situation that required our attention, so we pulled the ripcord again. We bought a house on the internet and moved to North Carolina. It was always meant to be temporary while our son went to school there, but we also enjoyed it. beaches, mountains. Okay, East Coast versions of mountains. Great food and friendly people. But here we go again. It wasn't home. Being away from the Northwest was hard. We missed our dear and longtime friends and neighbors. We missed the mountains and trees and waterfalls and ocean. We missed vacations in Long Beach. We missed the sea lions. We missed the Seahawks. We just felt out of place, and that's when I realized that I did indeed have a home, a true home, the Pacific Northwest. Our son graduated and moved on to his job this year, and we caught the proverbial first bus out of town. We are now fully moved back to the Northwest, and from the moment I went out the doors at the airport, everything just seemed right. The air seemed right. I feel so grateful to the people who hired me and gave me a place in Seattle for the first go-around. This time, I'm totally and even extremely retired, LOL. But the gratitude is still there. Every day, bless this place and all of you here. I am finally home. That's very well written.
It's very well written.
And expressed his sentiments just beautifully.
Right. I love the sentiment of the article, and I think it makes all of us think about home. Do we really have a place we call home? And I think you and I feel blessed. We have that, right?
Well, you were born in Canada.
Right. I moved around.
But you got down here at a fairly young age.
Right. I moved to the Seattle area almost 10 years old, and for the most part, been here ever since. Did take one job out of town and then came back. But I've always cherished this place. I think a lot of what Margaret said really resonated with me because I treasure the beauty of this place. Washington State, but also the Oregon coast. I love going down there. You've heard me talk a lot about Cannon Beach. So yeah, just this whole region, I feel very blessed.
Much like Margaret, I moved around a lot as a kid. My dad was in the FBI. I was born in California, believe it or not. Lived in Missouri, 3 different places, Illinois, 3 different places, and then we moved to Virginia, outside of D.C., which is where my folks, that was their last move.
Anchored down, yeah.
And I, at the time, would call that's my hometown.
Right.
But then you get into television and you make those moves, and some are better than others. And when I came out here almost 34 years ago,
right.
Oh, gee,
I know.
Christmas, thinking it would only be temporary, and it wasn't.
You know, we can talk a lot about the mountains and the waterways and everything, but we also even get a kick out of going east of the mountains, and it's an arid climate over there. But again, in its own way, it's beautiful, isn't it?
The whole state is beautiful. I remember coming here for the first time, and I think it was the fall of 1991, and I wanted to go to a college football game. The Huskies were really huge, and it was difficult. The stadium was packed, and it was difficult to get downtown. 90s, And well, let's drive over to Pullman, Washington, and discover that side of the state and watch a football game there. And when I got over at Snoqualmie Pass and went farther, and I'm going, this state is really diverse and really different, and it's really kind of neat. Yeah. And I could not think of moving any other place right now, and we have no plans to either. Yeah,
it's just hard to get this place out of your system. One last final anecdote for me. I have a really good friend in England, lives kind of in the greater London area, and he's come to visit once or twice, and we were just standing somewhere, I think looking out at Puget Sound, and he just looked right at me in his strong English accent and said, "Michael, you've landed in a wonderful corner of the world." So I always carry that with me too, what Stephen Cherry said to me too.
Yes, well, we're all lucky. And thank you, Margaret, for your wonderful words about being home, finally. And we're glad to have you back. And I guess that's the end of this Blakes and Bounds reporting from
Studio G,
which is home.